The devastation in Stanley Park from windstorms dismayed many. Within the 400-hectare park, over 10,000 trees were uprooted or violently snapped off during the storm. Every inch of the park was affected. In those disturbed environments, an invasive plant species, already living inside the park, is destroying biodiversity as it spreads. The Stanley Park Environmental Art Project was developed in response to this. Few selected artists worked with ecologists and park stewards for 2 years to complete ephemeral and then semi-permanent artworks in the park. Created from natural materials, these works are gradually decomposing back into the ecosystem.
We have some areas where ivy has probably been present in the park for greater than 50 years. And in those areas, the ivy creates a monoculture, basically what we would call an ivy desert.
So it doesn't participate in the local ecology, it just sort of takes over and is pretty much like a schoolyard bully is the way I explain it when I'm talking to children about it.
And if we leave ivy in the park for too long, it will basically reduce biodiversity in this area.
You know, as soon as you spend time in a place and you start to really try to consider it, and you try to feel it, it will start to speak to you in a way that you know, every site is unique and every person is unique, and it starts to get inside you, and it starts to tell you what it demands.
The site was so kind of disrupted when we got here. Like, it wasn't like we were stepping into a pristine, kind of untouched spot. This was like, it was a mess.
I know, I mean, it was piles of shavings and chips and stuff that they'd sprayed off into the woods that were pretty significant eyesores and would you know, it would take centuries for something to grow on it because it's so, you know, acidic, right? I mean, if you look at the old sawmill piles from you know, 30 years ago, there's still, nothing still grows on there, right? Because it takes so much nitrogen to break it down.
You know, people have walked up to it and said, oh, it's country music television. Like, what? No. Which is part of the learning process, right? A lot of people don't know what CMT stands for. And from that, just bringing it here, it evolved into something even more because it just happens that there's, you know, an amazing culturally modified tree right behind us.
There's a lot of regeneration going on in this area right now. There's foxgloves that are blooming that were never really here before. I never saw them. And I think now that the area is opened up, the understory is coming back.
Stanley Park is this amazing, huge canvas, and in many ways it was difficult to select one place, one area of working. So part of that was learning about materials like the cedar bark that I've used in the piece Entwined, and just experimenting with and using and touching and experiencing those materials, and I guess naturalizing myself to them in some way.
So the Ivy Project is a collaboration between myself and the Stanley Park Ecology Society as a part of the Environmental Art Project in Stanley Park. So partnering with SPES, we've been looking at how the ivy can be used to weave and crochet, make various structural shapes that are sculptures that can be dried out and returned to the forest and actually participate in the ecology in a positive way.
What's done with it normally is it's pulled out and then it's incinerated. So from an ecological point of view, I felt that this was a much more ecological and beneficial way in which to work with the ivy.
But it climbs along the ground and basically smothers other plants, so they can't get any light. This here is actually English ivy. It looks like a tree. It's quite large. This ivy was taken from Stanley Park off of a tree that was growing on, and it's gotten extremely large and thick, and this ivy adds a lot of biomass to the trees, so it is a problem in terms of it pulling down the trees or adding weight, and they may fall over due to that.
Here's this tree, 800 years old, but it was like it had been hacked out of there, and so we thought we'd take that place back.
The more we worked on it, we just kind of, when it started to come and was good, the work was basically, we were just listening. We were just kind of responding to the site, not being overly conceptual or kind of just attached, but just moving the stuff around with our hands.
So we spent I don't know, a week in here and removing all the debris from up against the standing dead cedar there, and rearranging the debris that came out of that pile and remake it back into something that would speak to some wholeness, I guess, and some
well, just grace. It's like just put some grace back to the tree, and someone would come in and good, probably not thinking about it, and good intentions somewhere, and cut a piece out of it, and so we thought we'd use our good intentions just to kind of put it all back together again.
Even these trees that have come down, it'll take 300 or 400 years for them to rot, but they form that next stage, the nurse trees that are their roots extended and stuff. I mean, it's just a natural cycle, and we wanted to try to disrupt that cycle in as little as possible.
As an Indigenous person, what it does is it tells somebody that this is how the land is used. It's really important for the next generations to know that they too will be culturally modifying trees, and that this is an art that we hope stays alive, because it's not only that it shows us on the land and it tells future generations that we've been using the trees for many practical uses, for clothing, for tools, for blankets. We know that, that one strip of bark that comes off a tree could probably make a few hats, it could make possibly a dress.
Just taking, simple plants and putting them on a pedestal and hopefully making people think about the importance of little things. Because we're just so used to just stepping over everything.
I've walked in the woods with people that just walk on everything, and they're like, well, what? Won't that just come back? And it's like, well, anything that's small and delicate that you step on and damage will take another year before it grows again.
I mean, even in planning the work itself, it's like, how do we get it in here without making too much of an impact? Then we ended up rolling the logs gently this morning, or rolling the pieces.
A lot of people never think about nurse logs in general. So to think about a nurse log and to help create a nurse log to speed that process up. I think as humans, if we're going to do anything to speed something up, let's speed up giving the earth back what it needs, as opposed to destroying. Let's do something positive.
It'll be very exciting to keep coming back here and seeing how it's going to evolve and blend in, and how nature is kind of going to claim it back somewhat.
For me, it's not just the living that it serves, but the ancestors, the ones that came before us, the ones that witnessed, the creation of this place that we know today, right?
I didn't start out thinking I was an environmental artist, and I still don't think that. I'm an artist that responds to a site and a place, wherever that might be. I actually am always hoping that any work that I create outside will actually create more of an awareness of the place that it's in. Because the park to me is a very social place, I wanted a way to have it really visible that, the voice of many people could be expressed through this piece. And I would create the form, but the actual content would come from different people. So in a way, it's almost like a message board of people's thoughts about nature, about the park, about what they feel is important. It's philosophical, it's spiritual, it's funny, it just covers so much. Once the pieces of wood were cut, I packed up a bunch in my car and used maybe 5 or 6 soldering tools that I had experimented with, and took that and a display with me to different community centers and places where groups were meeting. And then they would actually burn in their contribution. And what was really nice was that the room would just fill with this campfire smell, and really unanimously people loved that. What's wonderful about the work here is that I'm going to get to watch it over a period of time and see the effect of nature and weather and other forms of life inhabiting it. So in a way, this work is one of the more permanent works that I've done. And I'm getting to see it change rather than just have it up for a month in a gallery. Here it's going to actually have a life, which I think is wonderful. And it will change. It will just be so much richer as it starts to break down. I have no idea what will break down first, or how the colors might change, or how one side will change from the other. But it's going to go on having this other life that I can't predict. So I'm just happy that I live here and that I can come and see it myself as this ongoing shifting form.
It can't be composted because it just reroots, so what to do with that biomass becomes a bit of a problem other than burning, and that's where the partnership begins, where I'm an artist that usually is on the lookout for unwanted materials, things that are in large quantity, that are free, that I can take and repurpose, and often bring community in to participate in that process.
Often in restoration projects, you might have some slope instability where you have erosion or there's a steep slope. And in this case, we have a site that it's steep and it's quite degraded. There's not a lot of vegetation on it. So what we've done is Sharon has come up with a way of weaving the ivy together into a mat so that it doesn't continue eroding. It's like putting a blanket over the slope.
So the bio-netting was crocheted a couple of months before we installed it on the roof of the nature house, and then hung to dry in the Parks Board work yard for a few months in the sun. So we knew it would be nice and dead and not reroot once we installed it.
And we've pinned that down with some cedar stakes, and we've added some soil and mulch and planted the site with some what they're called wattles, made out of willow and dogwood, such species, native species that can grow from cuttings.
For small communities that don't have that kind of money to be buying the bio-netting that is the coconut and palm fiber, the intention of being able to pull ivy from the flat areas, process it in some way, such as crocheting it, as a community where you can kind of create a community celebratory event around making the netting, and then going back to the area where there is a slope and pulling the ivy that's on the slope and then installing the ivy netting that you've made as a replacement. That's kind of exciting. It's sort of a potential there that's quite fascinating.
And it's a really interesting project, and it's a great way to use the ivy to restore an area and make sure that it doesn't continually get degraded.
I think it's great. Today was the first time I actually saw it after the weather had started to weather the pieces in its natural habitat, adapting to its transformation from the actual live ivy that we had just pulled and worked with, and you could see the roots and the green, and now it's starting to decay and transform into another piece.
I believe art and science does mix, and in this case we have had good success in terms of using an artistic way to enhance an environmental value in the park, and we're also learning from that experience. So from a scientific perspective, we're collecting data on the regrowth of the ivy. Is it spreading again from our reintroduction? Is there any native species using it, plants or animals? So we're getting a lot of scientific information that hasn't been collected on ivy by incorporating it in an artistic way into the park.
Cedar being a tree of life, cedar having all these uses from its roots, its bark, its wood. And so I wanted to honor all of that in the piece and to weave together all those ideas and influences in the piece to create an offering, because everything is interconnected. And so when we take from one area, we have to be giving as well to keep that balance. The whole practice of land art, the whole idea behind this project was about enhancing and making people aware of the ecology around us, and a huge part of it is the distance people feel with the land. Whereas in Indigenous concepts, we are part of the land. Say land is life and life is land, and there's such a deep intrinsic connection. And in many ways, when we build layers of cement and buildings and industry and capital around and on top of that, we lose our connection We lose our connection to the land, and then it's not as important what you flush down your toilet, what you throw in a landfill, because you're not connected. You don't see the seabirds with plastic rings around their neck, and we don't see that, so we're not concerned by it. Whereas I think when you connect people to the land around them, they absorb that and they become aware, and people start to relate differently. But now is the really exciting part where the landscape around us, the animals, the plants, I get to collaborate with them. You know, it's wool, so it does have, you know, I'm picturing that something might nestle into it for the winter. Yeah, I'm happy with it. And I feel like this is the beginning of the journey of the work, in the sense of it's the beginning of the collaboration with the natural world around it. And I'll be really excited to see what happens with that.
I don't think the press had any idea of what it was like. What I thought was bad was a fraction of what it was.
When I got here, I couldn't believe my eyes.
It was shocking, and we immediately went and did our own survey of the forest and the damage, and looked really closely at the whole park. And for me, the most amazing thing was that every single inch of the park was affected. It wasn't any one area.
All the roads were impassable, all the trails were impassable. Giant trees uprooted and snapped off like matchsticks, and it's something that we've never ever seen in our lifetime before.
Stanley Park is recognized as an incredible park, and people come here from all over the world. And I think when the storm happened, it drew attention to some global issues, such as global warming and climate change, and the fact that severe storms are having effects all over. And I think it kind of brought it home to people that this is kind of the effect that can happen.
You know, there are those purists who think that the forest should be the forest and it shouldn't be manipulated at all. But we've already changed it from a human standpoint. And the environmental art that is going on is, I think, is a fantastic way of inviting people into the forest to not only see the art, but to reappreciate what the ecology of the forest is all about.
It's really a new way, I think, of responding to the world that we're in. And it felt really important to create an opportunity for artists to get involved and to help express the significance of what had happened, the significance of kind of that sense of loss of an invulnerability of a place that felt so strong and so solid.
I think everything that I personally do, and probably most of the things that John does, are talk about a greater global issue. Because it's pretty hard to escape no matter where you go now. I mean, there's the pine beetles, there's the, you know, the coming end of water, and the you know, in southern climes and various places around the planet, climate change, whatever. I mean, it's pretty common. It's got to be part of your psyche as you're working.
It's always so hard to imagine something that you've never seen before. Hard to imagine something that exists, you know, potentially quite far outside the boundaries of your definitions of things like art or ecology, that when there's an example, it makes it so much easier to start thinking about what you might want to do. And I think that's what this project can potentially provide.
And even 10 years ago, you're fighting with people to kind of look at ways of reusing buildings, saving energy and sustainability. Now sustainability is, you know, right off the top. Their expectation is now, well, can we get a silver or gold or a platinum LEED building? I mean, they're really prepared to kind of spend the money and have understood that there is a necessity involved in how we inhabit buildings and the planet to be responsive.
There's a real sense that many people have that we don't want to be introducing man-made things. We don't want to cover some natural space, some green space with cement. There's a real importance that artwork created in the park sit in it naturally as part of the park and not separate.
I guess my first thought was I was a little nervous about, you know, some kind of human impact, of course, in the forests of the park. But when I heard about the fact that it was an ephemeral art project, that made me a lot more comfortable, because I knew that it wasn't going to be a permanent installation of a natural kind of material, but that it would be something that would go back into the forest over time. So that made me feel a lot better about it.
One of the things that really attracted me to the project was that it was described as a collaborative opportunity. Not only would we be collaborating with nature, but we would have the opportunity to collaborate with ecologists, foresters, park stewards, that all those relationships would inform the work. We came to be able to talk about the work and to adapt ideas, and there were sites I was interested in that weren't feasible. They might have been safe for me to work in, but then if people came to see the work, it would just have too much of an impact.
Originally, well, personally, thought that it could have been kind of scary to deal with all these people that were involved in the project. And everybody had to put their bid in, and
yeah, it can be intimidating talking to
it could be
specialists.
Am I going to be able to do anything, you know? And then instead of being something that actually stifled the creativity, I personally saw it as you know, as something that, I mean, every challenge was a new push towards creating solutions, and that's very exciting.
So as well as helping to mitigate the kind of negative impacts, we were helping them to find ways that their project could actually enhance the environment. So there was things such as adding woody material, so that could be used by amphibians and rodents as nesting material or habitat, as well as fibrous material could be used by birds for building nests. So I tried to imagine ways that their artwork could actually benefit the environment as well.
There weren't actually as many boundaries as I might have been worried about, because you know that you're working with sensitive areas. It's not just, for me, I'm thinking about cultural sensitive areas. The people that I'm working with were teaching me about environmentally sensitive areas.
We felt, as we looked at how we would choose the artists, that we needed those visions. We needed the visions of the ecologists. We needed the understanding of the park that the park staff and park stewards brought to it. And we also needed to explore our ideas of what the park was, what this land was. And we needed to look at that from a whole variety of perspectives, especially including the First Nations perspective, the Coast Salish perspective. And we were looking for artists who also were shifting perspectives. And we need kind of a new way of approaching the world. In the end, it was having to figure out what group of artists would together be able to carry forward the project.
I think now that nature has kind of taken over the final step in the project, I'm really interested to see how it will transform over time. And I think each artwork is an individual, so they'll all react differently to the elements and natural forces such as moss growing and plants colonizing and animals using them. So I'm really interested to revisit each one of the artworks and see over time how they change. I think they're definitely gonna age well, and they'll look better over the years.
Looking at some of the conceptual ideas that the artist had, I had a very hard time visualizing these things out in a natural environment, let alone some of the materials that they wanted to incorporate into their designs. We had some very interesting requests as far as materials that they wanted to gather, but in the end, it's really quite interesting to see what the artists can take, which we probably consider it just to be debris, and they turn into something beautiful. I have to admit, I was a little skeptical, yeah, but they've sure proved me wrong, yeah.
Somehow the idea of allowing a piece of art to die runs counter to our notion of what art is, which is why I think environmental art is revolutionary in that aspect. I think it brings people back into nature, which is, I think, what it's supposed to do exactly.
And I feel like if we're quiet enough, we can absorb what's around us, and in that way the land speaks to us. And maybe we absorb it and relate to it more with our heart and our spirit than our mind and our language capacity. It's about getting connected.
Looks pretty good. Hey?
Yeah, I think it's pretty strong and responsive, and
I think it's brought the piece into balance. Like I really think the space works.
No, I think it's very peaceful. That's my impression of it now, is that it's peaceful and everything's kind of back to where it should have been maybe before we started.